using psychodynamic interaction as a valuable source of information in social research. Part 3. Pursuing the cause of irritation. The intrasubjective dramaturgy in the narrative. When applying a psychoanalytically informed analysis to the text in addition to the interactionist method, the researcher is also able to address the exposure of her own inner dramaturgy, Bear's Will, 2003, and bring it into the analysis. Bear's Will adds this concept of inner dramaturgy to Goffman's original interactionist concept by developing a psychoanalytical perspective on the interrelational dance between the interviewer and the interviewee. The focus in this analysis will thus be on the emotional involvement of myself, the researcher, in the relationship between the interviewer, me, and the interviewee, Lena. The analysis is thus concerned with the emotion held by the researcher when relating to the interaction between the people involved in the text. As already stated, I felt quite embarrassed that I did not seem to be listening to what Lena was telling me when I brushed her off with my remark, but it all sounds very exciting. However, when reading through the entire interview transcript, I was also struck by a feeling of irritation, not only towards myself, but most certainly towards Lena. As a result, I decided to ask myself what it was in the text that caused me to feel this way. Pursuing what Lena is talking about when I become irritated, I suggest that Lena is appealing to contradictory roles and emotions in me, leading to my irritation. By not having a clear focus on what she wants to tell me, and by talking in disjointed sentences, Lena appears fragile and appeals to my support in maintaining her focus and keeping on the right track. I appear to do so by not stopping her from rambling or asking her confrontational questions. So what makes me do this, one might ask? The fact that Lena is a single mother and, at age 37, she's in the process of changing careers by entering a demanding educational program might give us a hint. It is simply not politically correct to question the mission of a woman in her situation or to ask her whether she can cope with it all, even though I seem to sense that Lena questions it herself. Lena presents herself as a determined woman who draws on the general discourse that res killing through educational enhancement is a socially desirable path. Both she and I live in a society in which change and progress are generally demanded and supported. Lena is complying with this discourse by her educational enhancement and career change. In this light, one may understand my sense of being confronted with a very vulnerable woman as an appeal from Lena to me to not question her mission, but instead accept a role as the supportive counselor or adult. So when I respond to her long, rambling narrative about the impending internship by saying, "It all sounds very exciting," I also accept the role of the rational adult, thereby encouraging her to relate to the course of events in a rational and mature way. But as previously mentioned, Lena also appeals to another feeling in me and another role. If we consider again my responses throughout the excerpt, we notice that I generally respond in a confirmatory manner when she talks about how things seem unfair to her. I seem to support her grumbling about the problems of juggling work, for which the internship is very much a rehearsal, and family, particularly her responsibilities as a mother in terms of the problems of picking up children from daycare on time. As a mother of 2 children in the daycare age myself at the time of the interview, I can easily relate to this problem, not least in relation to having a guilty conscience about not picking one's children up at a suitable time and not being able to cope. So Lena also very much appeals to my role and identity as a mother, particularly in regard to my perception of how we mothers would generally like everyone around us to adjust to and be supportive of our needs. At the risk of being put into a conflicting role, I feel irritation and maybe even boredom when I bring myself back to the incident in reading the text. My feeling of irritation towards Lena seems very much related to the conflicting emotion that Lena arouses in me. On the one hand, I am filled with an urge to carry her because she seems so fragile, while on the other, I end up complying with her wish for me to back her up in the face of the injustice of the whole affair. These conflicting emotions in both myself and Lena are an indication of a more general subjective as well as social conflict. The tension in our interrelations is a token of Lena's insistence on living the social discourse of being willing to adapt to a lifelong learning situation, even though this is difficult and involves inner conflict. While she seems to have directed most of her attention towards being able to adapt to social and structural changes by educating herself further, being quite successful in achieving both self-reflection and theoretical insight, she is now faced with the reality of the professional field and working life. But she's left alone to process the contradictions that cause her anxiety. As the interviewer, I am confronted with Lena's conflict and anxiety as something I experience as my own inner conflict when I offer to contain her feelings and help her to stay in control. Much is at stake for both of us in this particular meeting, and we unconsciously decide to block the conflicts out of our conversation, addressing only practicalities and thereby rationalizing this entire ordeal. Conclusion: addressing hidden processes and unconscious emotions. Whether one uses an interactionist or psychoanalytically oriented analytical perspective, paying attention to the interrelational dynamics in a narrative implies focusing on aspects of the interplay which are not obvious to either of the individuals involved. Neither Lena nor I am consciously aware of the interplay that occurs between us, and we are obviously not in control of our reactions toward the underlying and hidden meanings involved. However, The implications of the hidden and unconscious aspects differ in the two approaches, and they're also theorized differently. When focusing on the intersubjective relation using interactionist theory, attention is directed towards the constitution and structure of social order, and meaning through an emphasis on how we act and what we say in order to maintain what we both understand as the legitimate social order. The hidden or non-conscious aspects are understood as being marginalized for social and institutional reasons. Similarly, the individual implications of the educational logic in the distribution of internship placements during the training to become a social educator are being marginalized in order to maintain a focus on the importance of professional qualifications. By uncovering these institutional dynamics in the event of distributing the placements, one gains an insight into how Lena's identity process of becoming a professional social educator is interlinked with her consciousness of not being able to secure a desirable internship placement. Thus, by using interactionist theory to analyze the intersubjective relation between a future social educator and this interested researcher, we are not only able to describe the communication. When we pay attention to how the social order is reproduced and negotiated in the interrelationship, we also gain insight into how the interviewee relates to and struggles with the way the researcher presents the social order of the professional field in question. While Lena talks about the upcoming internship, I seem to completely neglect her description of her struggle with the organizational structure and the unsupportive supervisor, since I do not consider it important. In our intersubjective relationship, Lena shows her struggle with having to accept the disregard for her personal hopes and expectations for her professional career as she forces me to support her. With a focus on the intrasubjective relations from a psychoanalytically oriented theoretical perspective, our attention is directed to how conflicts and dilemmas in the constitution of social meaning are negotiated in the communication, internalized in subjective relations, and played out in the emotional interrelationship between those involved. Within this understanding is a basic assumption that conflicts and dilemmas are a fundamental part of being in a society and interacting with it, but are often blocked out of our consciousness. The intrasubjective relation between Lena and me reveals her attempt to involve me in her struggle with her unfair or even humiliating treatment by appealing to my understanding. I seem to accept her appeal, but at the same time I myself struggle with the unacceptable feeling of wanting to disregard her. An unconscious inner conflict, such as mine, may be more or less articulated in a variety of interrelations, but is always present. As this analysis reveals, my feelings are being articulated unconsciously as an emotional involvement of both understanding and rejection. By using psychoanalytical theory to analyze our interrelations, it becomes apparent that Lena's insistence on living up to the formal norms of being willing to adapt to the political discourse of educating oneself further, as well as being involved in self-development and not being prevented by single parenting, divorce, or anything else, is an emotional challenge without any easy solution. Being determined to grasp the opportunities available, Lena is struggling with the contradictory demands of striving to be part of the winning team. Though I react with boredom, irritation, and support, I also give in to my own urge to rationalize the entire ordeal in order to not lose control myself. The psychoanalytical perspective reveals how conflicting emotions are precluded from society where rationalization is generally demanded, although the inner conflicts remain.